Super Mario 64 is a game that represents a seismic shift in game design. It's one that took its own series in such a different direction that many people consider it to be the first one that's worth playing for a modern audience. I don't agree with such assessments at all. Some of the best Super Mario games around are those in the early series, but I can understand some's focus on the exploration-based games over the classic flagpole goal style levels of those of the originals. Mario 64 is one of those games that represents 3D design itself to many people. As for those on consoles, it was often one of the first 3D games they ever played or saw. And with Nintendo's somewhat unique design philosophies, it's very different from many of the 3D platformers before it, and served as a design basis for the majority of games after it in the genre, much like the original Super Mario Bros. Did for 2D platformers. So how does the same internal Nintendo studio follow up such a classic? Super Mario Sunshine is nothing short of an oddball of a game. The most striking thing about it on a first playthrough is the strong summer vacation theming across the whole experience, something not particularly common to see in a series known for keeping to such basic level archetypes. Isle Delfino is a very lived-in space, with NPCs such as Piantas and Nokis around every corner to give you a piece of their mind on the pollution situation, or drop exposition that gives a stronger sense of their way of life. Levels are all places you would see on a real resort island, with towns, harbors, hotels, and the like to sell the realism of the land beyond the typical surreal landscapes of the Super Mario franchise, and everything has a dual purpose in design, believability and gameplay purpose. Mario has very snappy controls as compared to Super Mario 64, similar to the changes from Super Mario Bros. 3 to World. He feels a bit less weighty and more nimble, and he steers into the direction of the analog stick much more quickly and in less distance as compared to his turn radius in 64. This leads to a very tight feel to everything. Both new and experienced players should find the controls very natural, and there's a more solid sense of fluidity as compared to many other games in the 3D Super Mario sub-series. Moves such as the side flip and dive both return alongside some new counterparts with the spin jump and water slide, now possible with the addition of Flood, the biggest change from the previous outing. As this game is themed around cleaning up a polluted island from fantasy goop, what better way to do it than a fantasy water gun? Flood is a multi-purpose tool that most of Sunshine's challenges are built around. He has multiple nozzle modes, with the basic spray always available and the secondary modes switching out with different power-ups. Water spraying itself has many complexities, using the analog trigger sensitivity to switch between spray accompanying the basic movement, or a full press activating precision aiming mode, which can be used either with the basic camera and tank control-like movement, or a zoomed-in over-the-shoulder camera a la Resident Evil 4. Water spraying is the universal interaction of the game. You can spray enemies, goop, interactable graffiti, and just about anything else to get some sort of reaction. The nature of these interactions leads to a sort of start and stop rhythm, in which Mario often has to stand in place waiting for an interaction to complete, which is my biggest annoyance with the mechanic. However, it's a small compromise for what is actually a really solid system in execution, especially considering the nozzle swapping allows for additional movement options in various ways. The basic second mode for Flood is the hover nozzle, in which he becomes a water jetpack which can be used to traverse long jumps or adjust positioning after a mistake. Unfortunately, I find this movement option to be very sluggish and restrictive. The speed in which you move forward and turn brings previous momentum much lower, and small adjustments can take a long time to do because of Mario's slow turn speed in the air. He's unable to adjust his heading without using the hover nozzle as well, which means mid-air adjustments have to slow you down a considerable amount. This is a further incentive to get good at the controls, but I find the beginner's experience with such a tool to be lackluster. The other movement-based Flood upgrades fare much better in this regard, with the rocket nozzle providing a super high jump that's situational but generally fun to use. The turbo nozzle is the real fun one, giving Mario a constant high speed which is tough but satisfying to steer for the sadly few challenges it's used for in the game. Oh, and there's Yoshi too. His inclusion is so extraneous that there isn't much to say, with him spitting juice similar to the spray nozzle to give some extra interactions to specific enemies or environmental hazards. All three of these power-ups replace your hover nozzle, giving your movement a trade-off. Do you give up the ability to make mid-air adjustments to your heading direction? This makes for situations in which you're challenged to get better with Mario's base movement, something you also have to deal with in the secret stages. Occasionally levels will bring you into secret passages to abstract platforming voids that push you to master the core mechanics beyond what is even asked in the toughest levels of 64. It's a tall order for a genre that's usually considered casual and geared towards younger children, but I find these stages to be refreshing and fun personally. Though they give up on the strong theming that's present for the rest of the game, perhaps one of a few design admissions that the development cost of creating such finely crafted spaces led to a much smaller game in terms of content as compared to Mario's last 3D outing. Level design is a contentious topic when it comes to Sunshine. Many people herald it as the height of the 3D Mario lineage, while others tear it to shreds. I find myself somewhere in the middle. Whereas I see the strengths in the dual-purposed approach, I don't think it has as engaging platforming challenges as the heights of the series, with how many compromises needed to be made for such a believable space. But it pays off in the sense that Isle Delfino is still one of the most memorable spaces the plumber has ever traversed. The variety of locales leads to a mix of quality in terms of execution, as some level themes are better geared towards the gameplay than others. Bianco Hills is a very prototypical first level, with a town, lake, and mountain setup to give a variety of objectives similar to the structure of Bob-omb Battlefield at a larger scale. The town adds a nice sense of place to what is otherwise one of the most gamey feeling levels of the bunch, though I don't consider that a downside considering the objectives are all extremely tight in design. It slowly introduces you to harder platforming as the episodes go on, giving you a nice first major boss in PD Piranha, and the theming is strong enough to keep it all feeling about on par with the rest of the game in terms of believability. Much fuss has been made over the years in Super Mario 64's choice to kick players out of levels after collecting stars, something that Sunshine looked to remedy by making more changes to the level's objectives and streamlining each shine into its own contained challenge. I like this more bespoke approach to a degree. It makes the main shines feel more like rewards than the exploration-based collectible stars of 64. However, the ever-changing nature of the courses leads to a less connected feel between each objective. Rico Harbor is probably the best level of the entire set when it comes to the base design, as a seaside harbor and construction site leads to a perfect setup for both atmosphere and platforming design. The difficulty is a bit higher than that of Bianco Hills, but it's still in the early game mode of forgiving a lot of failed jumps with water underneath. The episodes focused mostly or solely on platforming are often the first thing that comes to mind when I think about this game. That said, the level sabotages itself by having multiple episodes that are based on blooper surfing, a strange and somewhat undercooked driving style mechanic. Glooper Blooper is a bit boring as far as bosses go, though bosses here in general often feel too slow to be engaging to fight. Many of them amount to waiting for cycles or baiting interactions in a slow back and forth. Bosses weren't Nintendo's strong suit in these types of games until Galaxy, but at least these are improved from the extremely simple punch and kick interaction bosses from 64. Gelato Beach is the first real casualty of a level that mismatches a theme to a good platforming stage in my opinion. It's fairly open and mostly flat, with a cliffside to give some verticality, but not enough. Many of the core tasks in this level are done simply by going to the right place for a short challenge, and the path there is often very bland. At least the Wiggler is one of the better bosses of the game, making use of the open space for a decent puzzle challenge. Much of this level revolves around a plot leading to the Sandbird, a secret stage that sticks out as the worst that's required to beat the game. It's one of a few different stages that push the physics to the limit and result in some janky interactions, especially highlighting the lack of momentum transfer when jumping on a moving object. On that subject, there's also this infamous pachinko level that uses some sort of physics hack to move Mario to the center of the machine, which makes it borderline impossible to get him to the right spots to collect all the red coins. Pina Park is something of a mixed bag. It has a decent and small outdoor beach section that's used for a few episodes, with less wasted space as compared to Gelato. The amusement park makes for a wonderful setting for platforming, and many episodes make great use of the concept, such as the one where you scale the back end of a Ferris wheel building. It's also one of the most fun levels when it comes to collecting blue coins, as they push the movement mechanics pretty far compared to the other stages. However, the real wrench in this level is the sloppy on-rails shooter segments on the roller coaster. There's no aiming reticle, so it's tough to have a solid sense of where exactly the rockets will end up as you shoot them. It doesn't matter all that much for the Mecha Bowser fight as he's a large target, but with the extra episode at the end, it's very hard to line up shots correctly to get all the balloons in the 3 laps you're allotted. Serena Beach has a unique concept compared to the other levels. It's mostly indoors in a haunted hotel. It's a nice change of pace, and they made decent use of the space as a gameplay challenge. The real strength here is how charming the in-universe setting is, with the guests often complaining as you make your way through their rooms. There's also a strong amount of variety in the location, with the small rooms contrasting well with the open lobby and the maze-like attic space. The downside here is there are multiple locations that aren't all that interesting. The outside of the hotel is used for a few different episodes about spray cleaning in open space, something different to do but with little opportunity for fun movement. There's a casino in the basement as well, which is a refreshing set piece, but annoyingly it's one that doesn't have any platforming until entering the level secret. It also has the weakest boss in King Boo, a 1-2 punch of both waiting for long cycles and hoping for luck that said cycles will end in you actually being able to damage him. Noki Bay is a very relaxed level in that it's much less populated than the rest of the game, and it's all focused around a large cliffside that makes for some of the best platforming in the entire experience. It's a joy to wander through the shifting maze sections as well, giving the game's excellent movement the jungle gym it felt like it needed the whole time. Though it's marred with some underwater sections that are a total pain to control, with Mario moving even more sluggishly around with the hover nozzle than usual. It's a mystery to me why they didn't try to replicate the swimming mechanics from 64, as that game had much more engaging water-based levels for its more intuitive controls in them. Unfortunately, there's also a retread of the Glooper Blooper, who already had 2 boss fights in Rico Harbor. One of the best levels is followed up by the absolute worst in Pianta Village. Since it's the final stage of the game, it ups the ante in terms of challenge, but in the worst ways. Having a high-up village with an underside to climb isn't a bad concept per se, but I would have designed it with multiple platforms to go between instead of just one for a better gameplay experience. As it exists now, the only way to force using the rafters is with fire goop that stun locks you to death on the overside. This makes for an entire episode of slow climbing and looking for the right exit with no frame of reference. The rest of the episodes don't fare much better, with menial tasks like bringing around chain chomps and a single race from one side of the village to the other. It's a sour note to end the game on, a sentiment that I also feel about the completionist experience. By my count, Super Mario Sunshine has 7 core courses, 14 secret courses or equivalent types of challenges, a hub world, and the tutorial area. There are 120 shine sprites, the main collectible of the game, much like the 120 power stars of Super Mario 64. However, that game features 15 core courses, and only 15 stars that are considered castle secrets strewn about the larger hub world, and its own set of secret or Bowser platforming challenge levels. Sunshine makes up this difference by having 8 main shines and 2 secret ones per level instead of 6, loads more secrets in the hub world, and 240 blue coins that trade for 24 shines total by the end of the game. There are times in which the blue coins are fun to collect. They encourage exploring levels to find all of the nooks and crannies that small items can be hidden in, and many of them require specific platforming challenges or puzzle-solving moments to collect. I especially like the shape graffiti challenges. They push the player to get from one spot of the level to another it shows you briefly in a fairly strict time limit. These are one of the toughest challenges of the game, pushing the player to use every movement technique to the fullest to get across the distance in as little time as possible. Though, the experience of trying to collect all blue coins, or 120 shines for that matter, not so much fun. It's a game of scouring every possible location in a process that slowly becomes more tedious as the playthrough goes. You do less and less platforming and more wandering and guessing to locations of hidden things. It's a challenge to guess which episode is best to enter, returning for further blue coins or 100 coin shines. Sunshine is also more eager to kick players out for collecting 100 coins, which itself is a much harder challenge than in 64 due to larger levels with more sparse coin placement. There are some red coin challenges in the secret stages which are nice, though the levels that don't have 2 secrets flub their way to the same number of secret shines by having tighter timing requirements on a previous challenge, or hiding a random sprayable object in a suspicious spot. A full playthrough of Super Mario Sunshine is like a day at the beach slowly turning bad as you get Sunburn. As it goes, there are more and more broken and unfinished mechanics, like this horrible boat section in the finale. In fact, the game ends on a rough note in general, with Corona Mountain being a very plain set of platforms that feels very haphazardly thrown together. The developers practically gave up on blue coin placement at this point too, just putting loads of them to the sides to be challenging simply because of the awful boat physics. The final Bowser fight is a letdown as well, with the whole ordeal amounting to not much more than a few rocket jump ground pounds with some hazards between the damage spots. I called my playthrough done at 102 shines due to the sheer exhaustion. It also didn't help that my copy repeatedly crashes on this one blue coin. This is a game that has many strengths and just as many weaknesses, perhaps killing its own reputation by 1,000 paper cuts. I think the casual experience is quite fun and refreshing, and at times it makes for some of the most memorable moments in the Mario franchise. That said, it feels a tad rushed in execution in certain elements and levels. The GameCube generation was a tough time for Nintendo. Interviews about this game's development tell of new techniques to share assets and resources between different projects. Sunshine was an early release in this new environment, and it's easy to see that they struggled in making enough assets to match up to the scale of Super Mario 64. With bigger levels, they attempted to give more and longer tasks, but this approach led to all sorts of menial tasks to make up for the amount of shines that they decided the game must need. This leads to the project overall feeling a tad undercooked, something highly unusual for a mainline Mario game. However, Sunshine still stands tall as one of the most thematically cohesive and memorable of Mario's 3D adventures. Isle Delfino is one of those places that will never leave your brain once you spend enough time in its finest resort facilities. It's standard for platform games to put gameplay above all else and accept abstractions that would be off-putting in other genres, but Super Mario Sunshine goes above and beyond in creating its own reality. You can really buy that people live in Delfino Plaza or the various other towns, shop for food, and spend their time working in the various locations Mario is simply a passerby in. It's no wonder there's been loads of references to this place over the years, as despite its many faults, this summer vacation is one that's hard to forget. Just be sure to bring some sunscreen so you don't get burned like I did.